Over a period of 30 years, the Soviet Union became obsessed with Venus. Between 1961 and 1984, they sent a staggering number of missions to this hostile planet. Missions that, for the most part, failed in catastrophic fashion. But with every failure came more determination, more ambition. Venus is the brightest object in our night sky. Shrouded in thick clouds, it's a hellish world that burns at temperatures high enough to melt lead. Its atmosphere is a swirling storm of sulfuric acid with crushing pressure that would destroy most life as we know it. And yet the Soviets seemed determined to get a closer look. The United States was busy focusing on the Moon and Mars, but the Soviet Union set its sights on something far more unimaginable and far-fetched. And to those who found out about the highly secret space program, it was deemed mission impossible. So why would anyone choose Venus as a world to explore? What drove them to spend so much time, energy, and resources on a fiery world that seemed so utterly inhospitable to human life? The Soviet Union's obsession with Venus officially began in the early 1960s with the launch of the Venera program, a series of space probes designed to explore the planet. The first of these, Venera 1, was launched on February 12, 1961. This was only 4 years after the Soviets had shocked the entire world by successfully launching Sputnik, the world's first artificial satellite. The space race was in full swing, and Venus, as Earth's closest planetary neighbor, seemed like a natural target for exploration by the Soviets. However, the first attempt didn't go well. Venera 1 lost contact with Earth 7 days after launch and drifted helplessly through the void of space, its signal gone forever. The spacecraft systems had failed, a reminder of just how difficult interplanetary travel really was. But the Soviet Union was undeterred by this failure. They quickly followed up with Venera 2 on November 12, 1965. This probe also failed to return any data. Venera 3 was launched just 4 days after Venera 2 and was designed to reach the surface of Venus. It did manage to crash land on the planet, becoming the first human-made object to impact another planet. But once again, contact was lost before any useful data could be transmitted back to Earth. Though not technically a success, this marked a significant milestone. Humanity had physically reached another planet. By the late 1960s, the Soviets were refining their designs and improving their understanding of Venus. They knew they were on the verge of something monumental, and for them, it was just the beginning. However, it seemed that Venus was a world that would remain unexplored. Every spacecraft the Soviets sent towards the planet was destroyed by either the extreme heat, the crushing atmospheric pressure, or mechanical failure. But instead of being discouraged, these failures only fueled the Soviet obsession with Venus. They would not give up. On June 12, 1967, the Soviet Union launched Venera 4, a mission that would change everything. Venera 4 was not just designed to fly by Venus, it was designed to enter its atmosphere. And this time, the mission would succeed. On October 18, 1967, Venera 4 entered Venus's atmosphere and began transmitting data back to Earth. For the first time in history, humanity was receiving information directly from another planet's atmosphere. The data revealed a world far more hostile than anyone had imagined. Venus's atmosphere was 90 times denser than Earth's, with surface temperatures reaching over 900 degrees Fahrenheit. The planet's air was almost entirely composed of carbon dioxide, with traces of nitrogen and toxic sulfuric acid clouds. Venera 4 managed to transmit data for 93 minutes as it descended before being crushed by Venus's intense pressure. Though the spacecraft didn't survive, it had accomplished its mission, providing scientists with their first real glimpse into the harsh realities of Venus. With each mission, the Soviets refined their technology. They learned from their failures, each probe getting closer to the surface. Each mission surviving just a little longer. By the early 1970s, the Soviets were ready to go even further. In 1970, they launched Venera 7, the first spacecraft specifically designed to land on Venus and transmit data from the surface. The engineers behind Venera 7 knew that the atmosphere of Venus was too dense for a parachute to slow the descent properly, so instead they built the probe to withstand a hard landing. On December 15, 1970, Venera 7 became the first human-made object to successfully land on another planet and transmit data back to Earth. It wasn't an easy landing. Venera 7 hit the surface at a far higher speed than intended. The probe fell after landing. Its antennas were now misaligned. For 23 minutes, it transmitted weak but valuable data back to Earth, confirming both the searing surface temperature and a crushing atmospheric pressure far greater than Earth's. Venera 7's mission was brief, but it was a triumph. It marked the first time humanity had successfully landed a spacecraft on another planet. But even though the Soviets had finally touched down on Venus, they weren't done yet. In 1972, the Soviets launched Venera 8, another landing mission. This time, the probe transmitted data for over 50 minutes from the surface of Venus, revealing more about the planet's atmosphere and surface conditions. But what the Soviets truly craved was something far more tantalizing. They wanted to see Venus. Photographing Venus is no simple task. The planet is covered in a dense layer of toxic sulfuric acid clouds, which stretches about 12 miles thick. This cloud layer sits approximately 30 to 37 miles above the planet's surface. Surrounding the clouds is an even larger haze layer that extends from as low as 20 miles to as high as 56 miles. Even though they understood this, in 1975 they launched Venera 9 and Venera 10, twin spacecraft that would go down in history as the first to capture images from the surface of another planet. These probes were equipped with cameras, and despite the hostile environment, they succeeded in their mission. For the first time, humanity had a glimpse of what Venus really looked like. These images were haunting. Venus's surface was covered in sharp, angular rocks, stretching out towards a horizon hidden by thick clouds. There were no signs of life, no rivers or oceans, only a barren wasteland that seemed to go on forever. The land was desolate, scorched by the unrelenting heat. Venera 9 transmitted data for 53 minutes before succumbing to the heat and pressure. Venera 10 lasted 65 minutes. In those brief moments, they sent back not only images but detailed measurements of the planet's atmosphere and surface. But even these successes weren't enough. The Soviets were still determined to push even further. It really was an obsession. The pinnacle of the Soviet Venera program came in 1982 with the launch of Venera 13 and Venera 14. These probes were the most advanced Venus landers ever built. They were designed to withstand the planet's extreme conditions for as long as possible, and they did not disappoint. On March 1, 1982, Venera 13 landed on Venus and began transmitting data. It survived for an astonishing 127 minutes. Over 2 hours in conditions that would melt most materials. Venera 14 landed 4 days later, and it also transmitted data for nearly an hour. Venera 13 and 14 sent back stunning panoramic images of the surface, showing jagged rocks, a sky that glowed with an otherworldly light, and a landscape that was as lifeless as it was fascinating. The colors were eerie, orange and red hues dominated the scene, distorted by the thick atmosphere. But the missions didn't just capture images. Venera 13 also recorded the sound of Venus. For the first time in human history, we had captured the sound of an alien world. What did it sound like? A haunting, low-frequency rumble. The sound of Venus's winds sweeping across the barren plains, the atmosphere so dense that even sound moved differently there. Venera 13 didn't just transmit sound and pictures, it also sent back crucial data about Venus's chemical composition. The probe analyzed the soil, confirming that the surface was mostly composed of basalt-like rock, and measured the levels of various elements like potassium, uranium, and thorium. This gave scientists vital clues about the geological history of Venus, suggesting it had volcanic activity in its past. Venera 14, landing just days later, provided similar data and an equally haunting glimpse into this inhospitable world. Together, these missions represented the culmination of over 2 decades of Soviet space exploration focused on Venus. But the Soviet obsession with Venus didn't even stop there. The Venera program continued with later missions, including Vega 1 and Vega 2, which launched in 1984. These missions took the Venus exploration one step further by deploying both a lander and a balloon into the planet's atmosphere. Yes, you heard that right, a balloon. These balloons were designed to float in Venus's upper atmosphere, far above the scorching surface. The idea was to study the chemical composition of the clouds and the wind patterns. The balloons floated for days, sending back valuable data that further expanded our understanding of Venus's complex and turbulent atmosphere. For a brief time, the Soviet Union had reached a point where it wasn't just landing on Venus, it was exploring its skies, flying through the thick clouds of sulfuric acid, a feat that seemed unimaginable when the first Venera missions had failed so spectacularly. But in 1989, the Soviet Union's exploration of Venus came to an end. The collapse of the Soviet Union and the decline of its space program meant that no further missions were launched. Venus, the planet that had so captivated the Soviets for decades, was left to its own devices, shrouded in mystery once again. What drove the Soviet Union to focus so intensely on Venus? Was it the sheer challenge of exploring a world so different from our own? Was it a desire to claim a first, to accomplish what no other country had dared? Or was there something deeper, a need to conquer not just space, but the most hostile environments it had to offer? Whatever the reason, the Soviet Union's obsession with Venus gave humanity its first real glimpse into the planet's hostile beauty. Their missions revealed a world more alien and deadly than anyone had ever imagined, and for a time, they held the title of the greatest explorers of Earth's sister planet. But Venus, with all its dangers and mysteries, remained largely unexplored to this day. Despite the incredible advancements made by the Soviet space program, we're still left with far more questions than answers. Soon after, the United States space program decided it needed to get a better look at Venus. On May 5th, 1989, the space shuttle Atlantis, with the Magellan probe loaded into its cargo bay, was launched into a heliocentric orbit, where it would circle the Sun 1.5 times before reaching Venus 15 months later, on August 10th, 1990. Its mission was to map the surface of the hellish world. It was able to map the entire planet, and it even imaged a raging volcano on the surface. Japan's Akatsuki probe, which was launched on May 21st, 2010, was designed to study Venus. It had a really rocky start though, and ended up unintentionally orbiting the Sun for 5 years instead. However, engineers ended up getting control of the spacecraft 5 years later, and it finally entered the orbit of Venus. Its infrared camera would end up giving us the clearest image of Venus ever. But just recently, the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency lost all contact with its Akatsuki probe. Since then, there's been some strange things discovered. Back in 2012, a senior researcher by the name of Dr. Leonid Xanformality, who was a contributor to the Venera missions, went back and re-examined the panoramic images taken by Venera 13 and described a couple of objects in the images which he claimed to be proof of some living creatures. Venera 13 landed in the eastern part of the elevated region on Venus, known as Phoebe Reggio, on March 1, 1982, and is famous for returning the only images of the planet's surface that we have. In this image, Dr. Xanformality noticed there seemed to be something like a black rag about 60 millimeters in height that wrapped itself around part of the probe. In the next 2 images taken by the spacecraft, the black object has disappeared without a trace. Perhaps one of the most interesting objects that Dr. Leonid Xanformality believed what he saw in the images is something that resembles a scorpion. Before the appearance of this object, the lander had been working for more than 1 hour and 27 minutes, but soon after this, the object disappeared without a trace. Some have debunked these finds since, then coming to the conclusion that the camera angles were different, and that's why the objects disappear in other images. It's very unlikely anything could survive on Venus. Just imagine what it would be like to descend through the planet's thick atmosphere in a spacesuit. Human curiosity knows no boundaries. We relentlessly strive to discover uncharted realms both on Earth and in the vast expanse of space. When exploring environments of extreme conditions here on Earth, we wear protective suits for safety. But could such equipment protect us while standing on the surface of Venus's blistering terrain? Let's say that you're on a mission to Venus in a ship that's built to withstand the incredible temperatures and pressures of this hellish world. The closest distance to Venus is roughly 24 million miles. If the rocket traveled at the speed of Venus Express, it would take roughly 5 months to take you there. As you travel toward Venus, the brightest planet in the solar system would appear as a shiny white sphere in the distance. Descending onto Venus through its upper atmosphere, the ship would be subject to ferocious winds, averaging 250 miles per hour. This speed is much faster than hurricanes and tornadoes on Earth, and about 60 times faster than Venus rotates on its axis. So you might expect to experience severe turbulence, and that would just be the first of many threatening dangers. The next of which are clouds of sulfuric acid rain. But it's not the kind of rain we think about here on Earth. There are several potential sources of sulfur on Venus, including volcanic activity. Venusian volcanoes release sulfur dioxide and other sulfur compounds into the atmosphere. In the upper atmosphere, sulfur dioxide reacts with water vapor to produce sulfuric acid. This reaction is catalyzed by sunlight. The sulfuric acid formed then condenses to form droplets, creating clouds as much as 10 miles thick that blanket the planet. These sulfuric acid clouds can produce precipitation. The surface temperature of Venus is extremely high, hotter than a conventional oven. As the sulfuric acid droplets fall towards the surface, they evaporate before reaching the ground due to the extreme temperatures. The acid droplets re-evaporate into the atmosphere, where they enter the chemical cycle once again. Now, that sulfuric acid probably isn't enough to corrode through a spacecraft passing through it, but it's possible it could pose some challenges, especially to visibility. Of course, the ship's navigation would likely be computer-controlled, and you could possibly land on the surface. As your ship reaches the ground, and it's time to go outside and explore, there's a new dangerous obstacle. The surface of Venus is incredibly hot, with average temperatures around 870 degrees Fahrenheit. That's even hotter than the surface of Mercury, despite Venus being farther from the Sun. That's because those thick clouds of sulfuric acid that we previously mentioned cause a potent greenhouse effect. But let's imagine that scientists have achieved a remarkable leap in technological advancement and created a much more durable spacesuit. We talked about those incredibly hot surface temperatures, and they don't drop even on the planet's night side. And since Venus hardly tilts on its axis, landing on the planet's poles wouldn't help either. Our most advanced firefighter suits are capable of enduring 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for brief periods, and about 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit over an extended duration. Equipped with such protective gear, a passenger could potentially withstand the infernal temperatures of Venus. But it's more than just having a suit that can withstand the infernal temperatures. Venusian gravity is about 90% that of our planet's gravity, so you'd expect to be able to move freely there. But that's far from what it would be like. As you took the first steps out of the ship, your suit monitors would go haywire. In an attempt to quickly raise your hand and assess the situation, you'd encounter intense resistance, much like you would trying to lift your hand underwater. This is because the atmospheric pressure on the surface of Venus is around 92 times that of Earth's atmospheric pressure at sea level. This is equivalent to the pressure found 3,000 feet underwater on Earth. Your spacesuit, and anything inside that suit, would be crushed if it was unable to handle the extreme pressure. That amount of pressure on you would feel like having an elephant sit on your chest, a whopping 1,350 pounds per square inch. Your protective gear would have to be as tough as those submarines that dive into the ocean's abyss on the deepest exploration missions. But let's say that you're in some type of exploration vehicle or special robotic suit that could handle the heat and pressure. The troubles have just started. Filled with sulfuric acid, Venusian clouds reflect approximately 70% of sunlight. This makes the planet's surface poorly lit, so you wouldn't be able to see anything beyond several miles. A person in a protective vehicle or suit on the surface of Venus could hardly distinguish between day and night. And if they were to get a whiff of that air, it would have an unpleasant smell like rotten eggs. On Earth, the sky is blue, but because the way sunlight is scattered by carbon dioxide molecules on Venus, its skies would appear rather yellow-reddish. And if you looked for the sun, you wouldn't see a clear point in the sky. Instead, there would be a blurred, yellow-tinged glow obscured by the thick atmosphere. At night, the sky would be devoid of any stars. We know this because we've already had a glimpse underneath Venus's cloud layers in the past. Back in the 1990s, NASA's Magellan spacecraft used radar to chart out 98% of the planet's surface. About 90% of Venus's landscape is covered by lava plains. But there are also two main highlands. A series of towering mountain regions make up about a third of the planet's exterior, with one mountain range that stands out. Maxwell Montes stretches 540 miles long and about 7 miles high. The planet's terrain is filled with craters, enormous volcanoes, sprawling rivers of lava that can stretch for up to 3,000 miles, and mysterious ring-like formations called crowns. And then there are intricate landscapes called tessera, the areas on Venus marked by their unique patterns of connected blocks of crust. But overall, the planet's surface is quite flat, even though it might not look like it if you were standing there. Scientists think that the thick atmosphere would bend light in a way that distorts the landscape, making it look weird. It would create an illusion where things seem like they're curving upward around you. We witness similar visual illusions on Earth during extreme heat, when air refracts light to create mirages, like objects appearing magnified or displaced from their actual position. The winds on the surface of Venus barely move at about 2 miles per hour. On Earth, winds at this speed would only cause ripples on the sea surface, so dust rising from the ground shouldn't bother you as much as you continue exploring this barren terrain. There's also lightning on Venus, but unlike here on our planet, it never reaches the ground, occasionally lighting up the sky. And there are no rainstorms. Today, Venus is devoid of any water, although it wasn't always like that. Venus has many active volcanoes, some much larger and more active than those on Earth. While you need not fear quakes due to the lack of tectonic movement on Venus, it's crucial to stay vigilant. The lack of tectonic activity is also the reason Venus has accumulated a lot of heat over millions of years. At any given moment, this could lead to a massive volcanic eruption capable of reshaping the planet's landscape. Imagine you get caught off guard. A toxic mushroom cloud forms in the distance. You transmit a message with all the data you've been able to gather and a warning to hold any future manned missions to the planet. Scientists on Earth wouldn't even notice something went wrong for another 2 minutes. It sounds like an impossible challenge to land humans on the planet, but there might just be a better way to explore this hellish world. A team of students from Northeastern University suggested a manned mission to Venus, although the crew wouldn't risk their lives on the planet's surface. They would instead closely monitor the entire mission from above. The project's name derives from Norse mythology, Valhalla. The plan is getting close to Venus and sending out a group of drones called Ravens to explore the area and find suitable places for landing. In the next part of the mission, another group of drones would be sent to examine the planet's surface and atmosphere. These drones, known as wolves, would carry cameras and sensors to gather data for around 3 to 5 hours until they are eventually destroyed due to the planet's harsh environment. Instead of waiting 2 minutes for a signal to reach our planet, there would only be a 10-second delay between the drone systems and the main computer on the spaceship. Being this close to Venus, a crew of humans could respond rapidly if any unexpected problems arise. If NASA ever does decide to make this project a reality, it would be the furthest any human has ever been in space. So far, NASA has other missions planned. Despite its unchanging nightmarish conditions, recent studies showed Venus has pockets of livable conditions too. In fact, it could have been the very first habitable planet in the entire solar system, having had an Earth-like climate and surface oceans of liquid water. According to computer modeling, the planet could have been habitable for approximately 2 billion years. But scientists have had a lot of questions, and to answer them, they need more data. The Da Vinci mission, expected to take place no earlier than 2029, will investigate the planet's atmosphere as the probe descends onto the surface, taking close images of the Venusian landscape. NASA hopes to study the origin of the planet's atmosphere, discover chemical signatures of once-present oceans, the rate of current volcanic activity, and the nature behind the highland regions. Researchers estimate that the probe should last about 1 hour before falling and crashing to the surface. The goal of another mission, set to launch in 2031, is to find out where the paths of Venus and Earth separated. The Veritas spacecraft will study geologically active regions, rock composition, and map the surface of the planet in high resolution. Meanwhile, the European Space Agency has been at work on their next Venus orbiter. The Envision mission, scheduled for launch in the early 2030s, aims to dive even deeper into Venus's mysteries. The mission will specifically focus on investigating volcanic gases in the planet's atmosphere, analyzing its surface composition, and probing its inner structure. The next decade could reveal more than we've ever known about this mysterious world, but until then, we could witness an historic event, the world's first private mission to Venus. After scientists found a potential biosignature in the planet's atmosphere, Rocket Lab was inspired to explore further. The mission could happen as soon as 2025 and provide answers for some long-standing questions. By studying how Venus evolved over billions of years, we could learn more about its history and what might lie ahead. Perhaps these missions will reveal if Venus could someday become a place fit for colonization. Because of its close location and some Earth-like features, Venus could be a better candidate as a second home compared to Mars. The journey to Venus would take less time, and people would not have to adjust to gravity since it's nearly identical to Earth's. In theory, there are several ways to terraform this hostile world. If Venus doesn't have a runaway greenhouse effect, its average surface temperature would be approximately -40 degrees Fahrenheit. To compare, without greenhouse gases, the average surface temperature on Earth would plummet from 59 degrees Fahrenheit to -0.4 degrees Fahrenheit. If we could somehow bring an entire ocean to Venus, we could potentially clear away some of the dust from its air and make carbon dioxide fall onto the planet's surface, turning into a solid. To do this, we could hit Venus with really cold objects, like icy comets, which would make water vapor and clouds. These clouds wouldn't just provide a large water source, but also help cool the planet down. Or if we find a different way to make carbon dioxide condense, we could put water on the rocky Venus's surface. This would start chemical reactions that create minerals similar to those found in numerous geological environments on Earth. But water isn't the only way. Hydrogen would work too. And we know that the solar system giants like Jupiter are full of this. If we could extract trillions of tons of hydrogen from Jupiter's atmosphere and transport it to Venus, the effect would be similar. Hydrogen would react with the atmospheric carbon dioxide, forming water and solid carbon. Gradually, the planet's atmosphere would contain less and less carbon dioxide, and entire oceans would form on the surface of Venus. As an additional source of cooling, scientists could build a large structure in space to block some of the sunlight reaching Venus. Once the amount of solar radiation decreases, the average surface temperatures would be suitable for building human habitats. So, what would it be like to live on Venus? Despite the planet's current hellish surface, scientists think that one region, high in the Venusian clouds, has remained habitable to the present day. The environment up there is more Earth-like, with low temperatures and pressures. The most popular concept so far is to build floating settlements high in Venus's atmosphere. At a latitude of 30 miles or more above the surface, the air pressure there is almost the same as at sea level on Earth, and the temperatures sit between 32 to 122 degrees Fahrenheit. Because of the thick atmosphere above, cosmic radiation would not be a problem. Initially, first colonists would live in airships resistant to sulfuric acid and filled with breathable air. As these cloud colonies expand, entire floating cities would blanket Venus. And if these cities were made of low albedo materials, they would absorb the sun's energy and act as a shield, shading the planet's surface from direct sunlight. After the surface cools, the settlers would migrate down, but life there would remain unlike that on Earth. Because the planet takes a long time to spin on its axis, a day on Venus equals 243 Earth days, but a year on Venus lasts 225 Earth days. But perhaps that could be solved too. A hypothetical device called a mass driver could be used to shoot the planet's atmosphere out into space. If we found a way to do that, the planet might start spinning faster, which would make its days shorter. The idea of colonizing Venus may seem far-fetched, but it's not entirely out of our reach. If we can design solid prototypes for the spacecraft and an energy-efficient way to make things float, there's a real chance we could launch a mission to Venus within the next 10 years. Perhaps it's our best shot in the near future. Elon Musk is convinced that we won't survive as a species without colonizing other planets. Exploration of extraterrestrial worlds will allow us to survive a possible apocalypse and also give us access to vast natural resources. And the starting point should be Mars. The head of SpaceX believes that human beings will first set foot on Mars by 2029, and within a few years after that, the first Martian colonies would start popping up around the planet. And while the preparation for the upcoming mission is in full swing, Mars remains a tricky place. Take dust, for example. Because of the intensity of winds there, dust would constantly accumulate on solar panels, and this would put them out of operation. Tiny rocks that dot the planet's surface could be even more damaging. In 2022, NASA showed images of the Curiosity rover's tires being torn to shreds by Martian soil. In fact, Mars is quite hostile. It's very cold, and the average temperature on the surface is about -60 degrees Celsius. A person there would quickly turn into an ice cube without some kind of protection or spacesuit. The magnetic field on the planet is very weak, and the atmosphere is 100 times thinner than the Earth's, meaning no protection from cosmic radiation. In addition, there's nothing to breathe, because the atmosphere of Mars is a poisonous cocktail of carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and argon gases. But with the help of modern technology, all this can be fixed. Even gravity, which is almost 3 times less than that on Earth, won't bring much trouble, although it will be necessary to spend several hours a day on special exercise machines to stay in good shape. Elon Musk is already preparing people to land on the Red Planet, but the flights will be very long. The average distance between Earth and Mars is 225 million kilometers. If you were driving a car at the speed of 112 kilometers per hour, it would take you 223 years to get there. At its closest point, the distance between the planets is about 62 million kilometers, and roughly 400 million kilometers at the farthest point. The best time for space flights to Mars from Earth comes once every 2 years, when the 2 planets' orbits are the closest. This is when the most advanced Starship spacecraft would launch from Earth. Each ship will be attached to a reusable carrier rocket with 42 Raptor engines. The total height of the rocket is 122 meters, the largest ever built, even surpassing NASA's Saturn V lunar rocket. The booster rocket will accelerate the spacecraft to a speed of 8,650 kilometers per hour, then detach and return to Earth. The ship will deliver people to Mars in about 7 months. And after filling the tanks with fuel made on Mars, the ship can be launched back to Earth using its own engines. To supply rockets with fuel, a plant will be built on Mars to produce methane and liquid oxygen from water ice and atmospheric carbon dioxide. The spacecraft will carry 100 or even 200 people and 100 tons of cargo. The Starship flotilla will make about 1,000 voyages a year. According to Musk, at this rate, by 2050, a city with millions of citizens and a developed industry could appear on the Red Planet. The idea is to build a city under protective domes. The dwellings will be built by robots before people arrive, and the rest could be printed by settlers using 3D printers. NASA has already held a competition for the best Martian house in a special program called 3D Printed Habitat Challenge. First place went to the Mars Ice House project, which is a 4-story igloo, an Eskimo yurt adapted to the conditions of Mars. It has many apartments and public rooms connected by a spiral staircase. The rooms would have curved walls to create the illusion of more space. But whatever shape the houses on Mars take, Elon Musk believes that the most important thing is to make the settlement independent of suppliers from Earth. Food would be grown on hydroponic farms powered by solar energy. As for the Martian soil, it's still unclear whether Earth plants will take root there. Recently, the lunar soil has been tested in the same regard. If there are settlers on the moon, they'll need to at least partially provide themselves with food. To find out if this would work, scientists from NASA and the University of Florida sowed green crops in lunar regolith and volcanic ash and added a nutrient solution. Arabidopsis thaliana, a relative of cruciferous vegetables, sprouted perfectly in this mixture, and this raised the moon's ranking as a site for colonization. Still, our satellite is too small to become a second Earth. Scientists are considering all the planets in the solar system that could become a full-fledged replacement for our home, even Mercury. It's difficult to imagine that a new Earth would be a celestial body that rotates so close to the Sun. Our star heats Mercury's surface to an average of 179 degrees Celsius, and the daily maximum temperature gets even higher, up to 427 degrees Celsius. And it has no atmosphere to deflect solar radiation. A solution to this was proposed back in 2011. The MESSENGER probe spotted a ton of Swiss cheese-like features on the surface of Mercury, which could indicate underground lava tubes. Colonies built inside such tubes would be naturally protected from solar radiation and extreme temperatures. But the lack of gravity is still an issue. The absence of gravity deprives human muscles of their usual load, and they begin to atrophy quite fast. And our bones would suffer even more. In prolonged weightlessness, for example, bone mass first decreases, then due to lack of stress on bones, calcium starts to break down and releases into the bloodstream, increasing the chance of bone fracture. Because the blood pressure in the human brain is much lower than in our feet, if you take gravity away, it would stabilize equally all across the body. This could lead to bleeding in blood vessels, impaired vision, and a stroke. But in case we decide to relocate to Venus, we'll avoid such troubles. The planet's gravity is almost equal to Earth's. Venus has a dense atmosphere that could shelter colonists from radiation. In addition, there's a huge amount of carbon dioxide accumulated in the atmosphere of the planet, and oxygen can be extracted from it. But there's a problem. Behind Venus's thick veil lies a living hell. Large quantities of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere create an extreme greenhouse effect and raise the temperature to about 475 degrees Celsius. The atmospheric pressure on Venus is about the same as the pressure at a depth of 900 meters underwater on Earth. So even the most protected probes would only survive for a few hours there before being flattened by the gigantic atmospheric press. The planet's upper atmosphere is also flooded with poisonous acid rain, many times more corrosive than the most acidic rain on our planet. And the wind, at a speed of 360 kilometers per hour, blows away everything in its path. So why do scientists still consider colonizing such a horrible planet? It turns out that Venus hides a place like Earth. At an altitude of about 50 kilometers, there's a region with a level of pressure and gravity almost like that found on Earth. And the temperature there is about 30 to 50 degrees Celsius, so building floating habitats behind the planet's clouds might be a good idea. The NASA team has already begun developing the high-altitude Venus operational concept. The initial mission envisaged an airship 129 meters long and 34 meters high, and protected from high temperatures with only a thin outer layer. One idea was to use a nitrogen and oxygen mixture as a lifting gas for the airship, making its full volume habitable. It would make the airship lighter than the Venusian atmosphere, allowing it to float above the clouds. And because Venus is close to the Sun, there would be abundant solar energy, meaning no problems with energy to power floating habitats and cool the airship. But at the edge of the solar system is yet another great place for colonists. Although this celestial body is Saturn's satellite, Titan is the size of a small planet and is the 10th largest object in the solar system, including the Sun. Its diameter is 1.06 times that of Mercury, 1.48 times that of the Moon, and 0.4 times that of Earth. The giant satellite resembles our planet more than any other celestial body in the solar system. Titan has many lakes of liquid methane and ethane, which are strikingly similar to Earth's bodies of water. They're constantly replenished by methane rains. The land is covered with dunes of solid hydrocarbons that look similar to the sand dunes on Earth. These hydrocarbons could be an excellent source of energy for the colonists. Even there, on this distant world, humans would have shields against radiation. Saturn's magnetosphere and Titan's nitrogen atmosphere are 50% thicker than Earth's, and water ice just beneath the surface of the satellite can be used to produce oxygen. And Titan is terribly cold. Temperatures average about minus 180 degrees Celsius, but colonists don't have to hide from the bitter cold under a spacesuit. Titan's dense atmosphere dissipates the cold, which could allow people to walk around wearing warm clothes and respirators. And they could make housing out of plastic using local raw materials. Scientists believe that on Titan we should build houses in the form of domes inflated with warm oxygen and nitrogen. Another unique feature about Titan is that the first people could fly like birds there. Weak gravity combined with a dense atmosphere would allow you to perform stunts in the air with wings attached to your back. But do we actually need another celestial body to live on? The idea of colonizing space isn't really new, as it was proposed back in 1975. But recently a team from Stanford University developed a project for a modern settlement among the stars and planets. It's made in the form of a torus with a diameter of 1.6 kilometers and a thickness of 150 meters. Such a dwelling would be able to accommodate 10,000 people. It would need to rotate continuously around the axis to create artificial gravity. There would be an industrial area for processing ore from nearby planets and their satellites. The leftover slag could be dumped outside, as it would become a reliable shield against all types of radiation. In the living area, each colonist would be given a separate apartment, located on different levels. All of them would be connected by spiral staircases, where people would often see each other upside down. The effect would occur as a result of the constant rotation of the structure. Scientists are already making plans to colonize Earth-like exoplanets near other stars. But do you think we can ever get that far? Share your thoughts with a comment and give us a like if you enjoyed the video. To make sure you don't miss out on anything incredible happening in our universe, stay tuned here by subscribing. Thanks for watching.